Remember when we used to talk about the paperless office,
e-commerce,
signing a contract on paper,
and even giving out an agent's pager number?
We're in a mobile world.
We're in a mobile world, and your business needs to be too.
It's a digital world.
Workflow is changing, and so too are our experiences.
There are over 350 proptech players right now
competing for the space.
How do you keep up with it all? And what's next?
Welcome to Founders,
a new podcast with Josh Phegan
on the future of workflow in real estate.
Real estate is an incredible business. And when you think about all the opportunities that sit in front, it's about actually understanding where technology plays to be able to iron it out and make it smoother for buyers, sellers, tenants, landlords. There's so many different apps, so many different things that have actually come to market, but yet there are some true strong players that have stayed for the test of time. They actually understand exactly what's going on, and they're in a position that they're building out incredible platforms, but also too making sure that they stay on the edge of innovation in AI and tech of the future that's really going to help to improve the productivity of the people sitting inside your business. Today, we've got a great conversation. Josh Symons from MRI, great to have you on board. We're going to talk a lot about what MRI is actually doing out in marketplace, but most importantly, some of the important things that agencies have got to get right in building trust with consumers before they can ever amplify the technology that's sitting in their very keyboards inside of their devices at the office. Josh, talk to us a little bit about who is MRI and what do you do? Because you're one of the major players in the Australian residential and New Zealand residential marketplaces from our perspective.
Yeah, great to be here, Josh. MRI as a business would be arguably the single biggest proptech player in the ANZ region. Globally, we're a proptech player. We serve 186 software applications globally, and every single one of those is a proptech application. So that gives you the idea of how invested we are in property technology. We would be in Australia now. We're serving over 50% of sales transactions are transacted on an MRI platform in Australia and New Zealand. And in Australia, we would manage over 50% of the professionally managed properties. So that gives you an idea of the investment that we've made and who we are and what we're about. And I think who is MRI? We are a platform player in the proptech space. We obviously own a number of solutions across those areas. So sales CRMs, property management solutions, but ultimately at the end of the day, where we believe this is going and where the world is headed is a platform play. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by a platform play, and I think we sat here 12 months ago and spoke about this, a platform play where you've got a point solution. So people are using a sales CRM, they're using a property management solution daily, but under that sits a platform that helps them bring those data sets together, that helps them do their job, that helps them automate mundane tasks and everything in between ultimately so that they can spend time doing what they need to do, which is what you talk about, and building those relationships.
And I think it's a really important conversation because I always say it's a system or a person, right? So inside of any business, is there a person who needs to perform that function? And what's the system that they're using to perform that function to guarantee minimal error rate and maximize customer service and customer experience? Now, in order to do that, if we think about it, some of the brands that people might know that fall underneath the MRI banner, on the sales side of stuff, you look at things like Box and Dice, your property suite over in New Zealand, Vault, Eagle Software, like they've been around for a long period of time. And ultimately, they play a really important role in lots of different marketplaces for doing what they do. And then literally on our property management side, we look at Property Tree being our major platform there. You gain a ton of insights in seeing what actually happens in how data plays and understanding what's happening. And I know that certainly in this residential real estate marketplace, there's a huge challenge for business owners and certainly for salespeople too, because you've seen a trend with a significant rise in interest rates that a lot of landlords have gone to sell investment properties. And all of a sudden, are they necessarily selling through the agency that manages their property or not? And are we selling them back to another investor to ideally keep them into the property management business so that we're not losing substantial chunks on equity? And it just starts to get you to think about the play about what about all these landlords, for example, that have been archived, that in the past sold an investment property? Do they have an appetite to buy another one today? Do they have a principal place of residence? Where do they actually live? Have we given them a sales market appraisal on that particular principal place of residence? And all of these great ideas are sitting there, but literally what's happened for a long period for agencies is that it's kind of felt that the tech has either lagged or that someone's brought out a particular little solution that does this one little bit really well, but ultimately that tech provider may not be around into the future if they don't have a minimum viable product. So Josh, this is a really important conversation because I know that you say that one of the most important things is to be able to build trust inside of any business before we can even have a look at the technology. And then it's about finding where the opportunities are and exploiting those opportunities so that we can look after customers in better ways. Talk to us a little about this trust building and why it's an important mechanism for agencies to get right.
Yeah, I think all of those systems that you spoke about are obviously core systems to businesses, as you said, and we view them as mission critical pieces of software. They're complex, they're big, they do a lot of work. But to your point, and I think that goes back to the platform conversation, they've often operated totally disparate and in total silos. So our view is the first thing to do is solve that and provide visibility to an agent or a property manager or a business owner or a trust accountant, whatever the persona is in that agency, about the customer. And if we can help agencies, agents, and property managers, or whatever role you play in a business, understand your customer at a basic level, we can start building trust. We know that all relationships in life, whether they're professional or personal, are built on trust. And there's a couple of things that trust enables people. Trust enables people to be better, to grow better, to maintain relationships longer. And to your point, go back to, if you have trust with a landlord and your agency has trust with a landlord, chances are when they think of selling, they're going to ring you rather than seeing a flyer in a letterbox somewhere and ringing a competitor. But trust doesn't exist in a lot of relationships in real estate agencies because there's lack of transparency, there's lack of consistency. And a lot of this comes down to the systems. The systems haven't allowed businesses to create that environment where they're consistently communicating to landlords about properties that are coming for sale on the rent roll, how much they're currently leased for. That information isn't available to on the website for people to see when they're looking for properties and things like that. So we all, you hear it time and time again that real estate agents and agencies are one of the least trusted professions. There's nothing malicious about that. But what we believe is the systems at their core, and if we get the platform right, it can start allowing them to build that trust by creating that consistency, by allowing them to be competent in what they do. And once again, competency is the systems just don't allow it right now because there's so many manual things they have to remember, and people are putting things in Outlook, people are putting things in their mobile phones and forgetting things. That comes across as incompetent, but that's because the systems don't support it. And I think as we move through the tech world where, as you say, there's a lot of point solutions out there that may be AI driven, which is a great buzzword, that do a certain task that aren't integrated to anything else, but hey, they do that task really, really well. You've got to get trust right, because then you move into a world of digital trust, which is a whole different ballgame, right? And I think that is something we've seen what happened with Optus, Medicare, all these different businesses. We know that it's happening in the real estate industry right now, that the digital trust is a whole different ballgame to trust. So let's get that right first, and we can do that through systems.
I think this is a really important conversation for people where they start to think about like even just the basics of two-factor authentication, about how you actually log into an account, and has been a really important part inside the residential real estate space. And we've heard situations where some of those logins have been compromised because there wasn't two-factor in play, and then someone's been able to get in and get access to driver's licenses and a whole range of bank account details and all of the above. You start realizing that, you've got a compliance mechanism that we all need to play by to maintain our real estate licenses. But then also, too, we've actually got an important conversation to understand, we are the holders of relationships, and we're the holders of that data, and what we do with that is a really important conversation. There's a big view about data lakes, so as opposed to data being in a particular system, that it can actually flow up into a data lake. So then the data scientists, in inverted commas, can then actually produce some insights to then pull that into some reporting or to some software to be actually provide some better quality insights around what we can go to do with that data. Now, I kind of go along in life, and one day I was there in December last year, and I realized that I'd completely missed a huge data set. And I was like, this is interesting. So inside of most residential real estate practices around the country, when a landlord sells an investment property, the property manager is the one who's dealing with the landlord. All of a sudden, the property has been sold. It's been the tenant's moved out. It's now in vacant possession. All of a sudden, a homeowner buys it, moves in, and what the property manager tends to do is that they go to that particular client and they archive them. So as far as they're concerned, we're no longer doing a transaction anymore. So see you later. Have a nice life. And sure, that's actually true around that particular transaction, but there's a complete lack of view around what we go to call lifetime value of a customer. So what are actually the essential services that Josh can tap into during his time in being a property owner, whether or not he's an investor or an owner-occupier? And it made me think, oh my goodness, I've completely missed this. So we went down, we did this data research on a customer down in Melbourne, and we went to one of their offices where they'd organically grown and also purchased to get to 1,000 properties under management over the course of the last decade. And what we did is we actually then went into their system. We said, find us all the people that have inquired on fee that didn't go with us, and find all the people, for example, that were previous landlords at some point in time but have been archived. And we actually found over 3,000 records in this business for people that had inquired or that had been archived. And then when we did the search and we pushed harder, and this took quite a bit of effort because we weren't quite there yet on tech and systems, and we actually found that over 2,200 of those archived landlords live in the core market area of that particular sales business, and none of them had ever been offered a market valuation or market appraisal on their principal place of residence. Yep. And it's bizarre that you'd actually have one customer which you've archived, which could actually be a revenue lead source in a different service line, better known as sales, and no one's ever gone to do that. And to me, I actually felt silly that I hadn't identified that data source over the course of the last 15 years in training, that I'd completely missed that on a prospecting point of view. But then I then started to think about, well, how many of those archive landlords would like to buy another investment property? And how come we're not selling them investment properties in the lens that they actually want to see that in? So in other words, I don't know about you, but I've seen, I think Defence Housing Australia is a good example of that, where they sell a lot of properties that they go and buy. They lease it back to the army. There's a length of tenure. There's a certain amount of rent increases. There's a management fee associated, and they paint the walls and recarpet it when they move out. But it's amazing how they actually go to sell those properties. And when I have a look at how we sell residential real estate in Australia, I go to any real estate agency's website, and I've been to a few, and I haven't been successful yet. So maybe I don't know how to do it, or maybe I'm not going to the right ones. But how come I can't go find all properties currently for sale that have a tenancy in play, and then sort order based on rental return, or sort order on greatest potential for redevelopment, whatever. And that stuff just isn't there. And when you start to think about the lenses of how people see things, the technology is moving very quickly, but we've got to get smarter to think about its application on how we would apply that. What are your thoughts on some of that, and how that can be unboxed with having a platform instead with sales and property management, where that feeds up into things like data lakes that allows you better access to that information so you can move at speed when we think of these ideas?
Yeah, I think, so from a product perspective, our teams will always talk about what is the problem to solve, and then they'll talk about what is the use case. And that's the perfect example there. With the Defence Force housing, right, the reason that people invest in that is because it's consistent. They get a consistent return. They know that they have got a committed tenant. They know that it's going to get painted, it's going to get carpeted, and all these things are going to happen throughout the life cycle of that relationship, and it is absolutely consistent. And they pay a premium for that, right? Like I think it's north of 20% from a management fee perspective if you normalize it. So the problem to solve, and people often say to us, I just want all my property management data in my sales CRM, all my landlords and all my tenants. And the question we'll always say is, okay, well, great, why? They often can't respond to the why. So we've through a lot of UI, UX, product work, taken it back a few steps. We can get the data in there. We've got we've got proof of concepts, and we've got live customers in Box and Dice where we've got property management and sales data coming together. And we take it down to a really simple level. So providing them the ability to move those contacts into Box and Dice, to then label those contacts as, yes, they're a current landlord, they're a former landlord, this, they're that. And then obviously that happens in a data lake. To the end user, it's in Box and Dice, or it's in Property Tree, or in Vault, or whatever CRM they're using from us. And it literally allows to track that relationship, right, and give visibility to that relationship. And that's ultimately, I think, the single biggest thing here for us is let's start small, let's start basic, but let's give people visibility to the information, which is then giving them visibility to the opportunity. And that's really where we've started. There isn't, there's no rocket science to this, right? There's no AI to this right now. It is literally, hey, let's have some data scientists, bring the data sets together, look for those common relationships, or the landlord that's in the sales database and hasn't had activity on it. Let's surface that as a landlord that is currently under management, and then allow the business to take action. Data is only valuable when it derives insight, and then they can actually take action. Otherwise, it's worthless ultimately.
Founders is brought to you by Josh Phegan Digital. You know, when we were setting out to go and create Josh Phegan Digital, we just had this whole idea that we wanted training to be on demand. You know, and everything in our life is on demand. We just press play inside of the Netflix app. We press play on YouTube, play on Spotify. Why couldn't we just press play on training? And what we decided is we want to be like super relevant to real estate agents, so that in under a couple of minutes each day, if you wanted to, you could upskill and you could grow in new ways. And so we decided that we were going to release this thing that we called the Edit, which is basically the latest in property news stories that's happening every week right the way around the country. So you could be incredibly sharp in your conversations with sellers. And then we built out the short courses, which was all about rapidly building skills, whether or not it's about learning how to get better fees or to put on an assistant. And then we actually wanted to give you access to blueprints, so you didn't have to wait for it every year. You could just watch it whenever you wanted and actually go from zero to hero around everything that it takes, from goal setting, self and energy management, what you're doing around prospecting, listing, negotiation, and actually just have a system for the way that you work. Together with, getting really inspired by some of the best people in the industry with the black and white interviews. Josh Phegan Digital is available on iOS and also on Android. It's an incredible app and it gives you everything that you'll need to be a much better agent. It's time to switch on. So a lot of people have spoken about like integrations and API and not all API, not all integrations are equal.
Yep.
About, one way, two way, sync, whole conversation on that speed at which that sort of stuff actually happens. And it's caused a lot of issue because like when all of a sudden you start to see that there are certain providers now that are in market who say, hey, we're actually just not going to do that integration unless we get paid for it, or there's a revenue share piece and some of that sort of stuff. And so you start realizing that, hey, hang on a second, the number one job of what you want to think about is that do my systems actually talk?
Yep.
And if they do talk, how much do they talk? And does it actually allow me to be able to pull out the insights? And this is important when you're going to go and apply AI type tech is, oh, hang on a second, what's it actually there to do? And now I have a view that a lot of people love the concept of AI. There's a lot of people that are fearful of AI that's going to do us without a job. But what we're actually looking at say, how do we actually take the mundane tasks and get those things done that can be automated with excellence so that we can actually amplify more of the human moments that really matter?
Yeah.
And it's I get this where people go, oh, did you get ChatGPT to write the blueprint manual this year? No, I didn't actually get it to write the blueprint manual because I actually know my customer better than anyone else. But the most important conversation is writer's block's also gone. So
yes.
If I said, okay, great,
Totally.
can you start, what's the opening paragraph for sending a proposal to someone? It could give me some basics and then I'm going to go and amplify that. Now, I know that you were talking about some examples, I think, in Vault where you're using AI to actually help to write some emails, but you still have the human component there. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So both Vault and Property Suite, we've rolled out ChatGPT capability.
Mm-hmm.
It really is for that mundane task or to remove that writer's block, as you say, right? So in Property Suite over in New Zealand, we've got the capability for customers to draft listing copy using ChatGPT. Now, you definitely need the approval on that because I think there was a situation where there was a property listed and it was practically like renovate or detonate type thing, and it had a fireplace or something in it, an ornate fireplace in it, and it was talk that the ChatGPT wrote about how great this property was and this amazing fireplace and the character it added, and that's just a perfect example of where it's at, right? And same in Vault. So in Vault, it's drafting email responses to inquiries. And once again, that comes back to that consistency piece. Help them respond in a timely manner, in a simple way, give them a starting point. Ideally, they then take that starting point, review it, and hit send. So there's some early examples, I guess, of it. And to the integration point, there is a use case for every type of integration, right? Whether it's a read, write, push, pull, or whether you've got situations where you are just pushing data out to a client. And we've got plenty of examples of that in property management, for example, particularly like build to rent. Obviously, it's an emerging asset class. People are really interested in it. Slightly different to standard residential property management where they need all financial data. So in that use case, it makes sense for us to just send it out to them. We don't take anything back. But then when you're talking about things like integrating property management and sales CRM, there's two ways we look at it. There is still a point-to-point integration where, for example, Property Tree and Vault will be talking to push a listing to a portal, and that is a read-write capability. Goes between the two. And then there is the concept of the data lake, pushing to a centralized data lake and then pulling into a system once again. So I think for us, once again, given the importance or the role we play, we integrate with almost anyone and everyone, including our competitors, where it makes sense for the client and can help the client achieve an outcome that they need. and provide consistency. We totally accept that people will not use 100% of our solutions. That is just unrealistic. So if we can integrate with a competitor, we can pull information in, surface it in a system, we'll provide information back, and it helps our clients create that consistent experience across the board. It's a win-win for everyone ultimately.
I think it's a really refreshing perspective, because one of the things is that, unfortunately, you kind of get a lot of learned history. So if an organization started on a CRM, on a sales CRM, for example, 10 years later, they might have 100, 200, 300 salespeople. They've all trained them on all of that. And the actual amount of pain to transition, geez, there'd have to be some very specific feature sets that you're going after or problems that you were solving to go to do that. But having said that, that doesn't mean that I don't want to actually provide a better quality consumer experience. Yep. And I think that was where the challenges of what I've seen is that there was a massive explosion in prop tech companies in Australia over the last, 4 or 5 years. The funds were very cheap. There was a lot of VC that was available. People could get access to cash very quickly. And all of a sudden, that's actually dried up very quickly. And what we've seen very fast is that people go, well, what's the difference between core and extras? So what is actually the core platform capabilities that we absolutely need as a minimum viable product to actually make our business run? Mm-hmm. And then what are the extras that we can afford to add or experiment with, or, in terms of our innovation section of our business, to have a see whether or not we can actually, automate some of these mundane tasks to actually get it there. And I think this is interesting. You were telling me about some of the automation about invoicing and what's happening in the PM space. Tell us a little bit about that and what you found in running some of those trials.
Yeah, I think it's what our teams live for daily, right? Is to remove friction, to remove cost to serve across both sales and PM. But it does come at a cost. To develop new tech, it comes at a cost. We have the same market constraints as our customers, with rising interest rates, with a contraction in market, in people's ability to spend and things like that. And this is a really good use case of true AI and machine learning. In fact, so processing bulk council rates, strata levies,
water rates.
With water rates, we've got businesses that would process tens of thousands of these a year, and they require generally, by and large, some form of manual intervention, because the tech has been old. So we rolled out a solution that is true AI and machine learning driven, that doesn't require a customer to touch an invoice, that can process them in batches of thousands at a time. And yeah, sometimes the tech does queue up and things like that, but the tech queues these things and processes them. The challenge for us and the challenge for the industry to grapple with is, now that the tech is there, there is a cost for that tech. And we're talking maybe 40 cents an invoice in this situation, right? So not huge volumes. It's giving them the ability to take a human off that job, but they're then struggling with taking the human away and pointing them at something else, or they're struggling with reducing their total headcount in their business because these people have worked with them for a long time and they're loyal, and someone says, no, we still need to look at this invoice. So I think that's a huge challenge to overcome, right? Because AI's here. It does work. There's absolute use cases where that is the perfect example of a mundane job that is not relationship driven, where tech should be deployed to do that work. But I do question if everyone fully comprehends what it means when we do those pieces of or deliver that tech to remove the job from a human.
Yeah, the interesting part I look at is that there are some there's some interesting things happening in the data world at the moment around third-party data versus first-party, and what happens with that exhaust data and how people can get access to it. And the thing that I look at is I say, okay, great. If data is equal, what's not is relationship.
Yep.
And so how do I actually build relationship? We'll look at the paramedic, and they build it because they're relevant.
Yep.
Their frequency is driven by that relevance.
Yep.
They're not coming to your house every day. It's only when you fall over. And then off the back of that, they're then in a position that then they're highly competent around what it is that they do because they're consistent in their actions. Every ambulance driver turns up in an ambulance with wears a uniform, has a name badge, is 100% respectful, and has an incredible ability to be able to read the situational play. And if you think about that, you go, okay, great, take that back into a residential real estate space. Yep. Well, that's exactly the same thing that's actually got to happen, is that you've got to have a relationship. So I'm lucky enough, I bought my first investment property very young. I've owned that for north of 20 years now. I have never had a call from anyone in that organisation to say, hey, would you like to buy another investment property? I've never had anyone say, hey, is there anything else that we could do that would allow us to charge you a higher rate? They've never actually tried to put up how much they're charging me. We've never had a strategic conversation around what I'm doing with my portfolio. There's never been a conversation around my principal place of residence. And they have an office in both locations of A, where I live, and B, where those investment properties are. And to me, it's like, it's either that it's fundamentally inept, like, people just have not thought about the ideas, or they know the ideas and they're having trouble executing or implementing, or they're just fundamentally lazy. I can't decide what it is, Josh, between one of those three things, but it is actually a really interesting part that literally the power is actually in those relationships. So what I look at is that, go back to the Jim Collins conversation. Have we got the right people on the bus? Have we got the right people sitting on the right seats on the bus? And is it now time to go and reimagine? And so we've actually got people who are saying we don't look at the total number of properties that we manage. We have a look as one of the metrics. We also have a look at the total amount of revenue that's managed by a property manager, and that we've got to make sure that we've got a minimum amount of revenue that's managed, and we've got to make sure the relationships are a certain NPS score to make sure that they're actually relevant. And this is that whole thing, is that if you ring a landlord and they can't name who their property manager is, or you ring a landlord and they've never had their principal place of residence, a market appraisal on that, and they've owned that for a decade and they've been your customer for a decade, like, what are you actually doing? And that's the whole conversation. If you think about recency, frequency, monetization, who's recently spent money with us, who frequently spends money with us, and who's spent the most amount of money with us. In most residential real estate practices, the person who's getting the highest scores on RFM analysis is a landlord. And most likely has been a previous landlord, an archive landlord that just isn't even looked after. So the opportunity is so great, it's got to be worth the pain of change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you would have heard this multiple times, right? Real estate agents are always shocked when they drive down the street and someone they spoke to 5 years ago has a competitor's signboard out the front, right? But that's because they're not doing all those things. And to be able to get to a place where you can do those things, you've got to be prepared to make the change. You've got to be prepared to let the tech do some of the work, and you've got to be prepared to make the changes in the way your business is structured. And we're not, by any stretch of the imagination, advocating to remove people from businesses. But it's about point people to jobs and tasks that are not done today because you haven't been able to do them, which then drive outcomes of growth, of better relationships, of building brand equity and all those other things.
Which to me is about like driving value proposition to the customer. I'm going to say, I buy a lot of things from Amazon because I buy a lot of books, but also buy a lot of other stuff. And I just have trust and affinity with the brand that it's going to turn up, and I'm going to be able to track my package. And if there's an issue, that they'll resolve it. Whereas you might go to a random website when you're looking for something really specific or niche. You're like, oh, geez, I hope this turns up. Geez, they've taken the credit card detail, but how come there's no confirmation of that order? And you start understanding what consumers go through. It's exactly the same thing in our space. It's an interesting one for someone to actually go and have a look at their existing tech. And I know that a lot of principals have done that as we come through some of that. They go, well, what subscriptions do I have, and what are we using and what are we not using? When you're talking to someone about that, how does someone approach what the future needs of their business may well be? And is it as simple as just write down all the current software that you've got and actually say, what does it actually do? And find out, do any of your existing solutions actually have new capabilities that you might not be aware of that you can actually now bring into your business that will streamline how you do the work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to like a lot of the systems that we have both locally and globally are mission critical. They're core systems, they're ERP related, they're contact management related. And by virtue of the number of customers using those systems, they get invested in, they grow. And a lot of people don't realize that those core systems add incremental features and functions that are outside of accounting and CRM, but they get excited because they go, oh, this particular provider came to me and spoke to me about this very small job. And they get excited by, oh, it's new, it's cool, it's using a whole heap of buzzwords, but the core system actually does it. So I think that the conversations we have regularly are go back to the core systems, understand what's changed in the core systems, what the core systems do, and how will they do it, because you may get what you need out of the core system. And it may not do everything that the new U-Butte Ferrari sitting out on the street does, but it allows you to, one, have less tech in your business. Tech fatigue is well known, well documented, well spoken about, and the change that goes with that. That's not a new conversation, but it will allow people to focus on those core building blocks, really understand them, get the most out of them, and then where you see gaps or where you want to create a competitive advantage or a unique selling point that's different to your competitors, look to leverage the add-ons, right? And start with what's integrated and what's not. Because where things are not integrated, you will never get the full capability and realize the full value of a product.
I think this is a really important conversation about, what's the marketplace of who actually connects in with that, but actually really having a look. And I did something on the weekend. We have a social piece of software that pushes all of our social content, and I realized that they actually now have a thing for the, for the link. So that inside of Instagram and all of those, the link in bio, that's all done correctly. I was like, we use an alternate product for that. And then, but yet I could use the one that's already sitting inside of the existing software tool that we use. And then when I enabled that tool in seconds, every single time now I go to set up the post, it's like, by the way, there's a link in bio comment here. So please put it in. And it's like, wow. So now it's automated workflow. And it's amazing when you go, that was actually already an existing capability. And they brought it out last year, but I actually wasn't aware of it. So the best thing that you can do in business, sit down and have a conversation and say, okay, great. Where are we at with our existing core platforms? What are the capabilities that they've got? What do we actually need, sitting inside of the business? Let's go and talk to our provider and actually see what's on the plate, see what we actually can do, and do things that move the needle the most.
Yep.
Don't just do little things that look kind of nice, because what you're going to end up is with a whole range of tech and stuff that literally 3 months later probably doesn't even get used anymore.
Yeah, totally. I had a conversation with a very large property management business last week in Melbourne. And they said, this is just getting too hard, too complicated, too much tech, and we're going to look to do this, and this. And everything they spoke about was changing the core system, literally everything. And I always go back to the question of, well, why? Why did you put all of these pieces of tech in? And often you'll get responses of like, we had a PM at that point in time that loved that, and then we had this person that loved this, and the list just grows and grows and grows. And when you sit down and understand why, generally the why is because they've just gone with the flow effectively of the people they've had in the business rather than understanding the problem they're trying to solve. And the way I would always approach that conversation is ask why, and then understand what the problem is to solve and why we're in the position we're in, and then let's understand your business. And I think if you can map all the things that you do and your people do on a daily basis, all those things that are regulatory and you must do, all those things that you like to do because it sets you apart and all those things, map each of the pieces of tech to those jobs and then look at what you've got that's left over. You'll start to get a pretty good understanding of where some of the problems are, right? And these things, as you say, like in the market we're in, like people need to start paring back. That is just by virtue of the world we live in and the economic times we focus in. But start with why. What are the problems you're looking to solve? What you've got today, and what capability exists in what you've got today, and then go from there ultimately.
So, Josh, if someone was saying, hey, look, I want to have a bit of a conversation with MRI, see some of the solutions that are in play, learn a bit more about their existing solution, or maybe be in a position of potentially thinking about a change on things, how would they get in contact with MRI? Where would they go? Yeah,
best place would be to go to our website, which is www.mrisoftware.com/au, which will get you to the APAC region specific website. And hit on one of there's plenty of book now or demo now or talk to one of our people now links. And one of our team will reach out and work out how we can best help you solve some of those problems.
Fantastic, Josh. So great to have you on the Founders Podcast. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Josh.